Hello everyone, and welcome to Phosphate Digital Week. Today and this morning is our first session, and we will talk about a crucial topic in animal production, heat stress issue, nutritional strategies in monogastrics. This webinar is a part of a series addressing major challenges in livestock farming across all species, including aquaculture, poultry, swine, and ruminants. In this session, we will explore the impact of heat stress and the physiology of the animals on performance results. Then, we will present the nutritional strategies to manage heat stress in swine and poultry production. Our guest speaker, Dr. Roger David, Senior Consultant and Product Manager at Shoulders Field Research, will share his expertise on this topic. Following, our Poultry Product Manager, Jezabel Gutierrez-Valeros, will discuss phosphate solution with a particular focus on calcigros for 10 minutes. We will conclude with a 10-minute Q&A session, giving you the opportunity to ask your questions. If you want to ask your questions, you can please use the section, the Q&A session to ask your question, and at the end we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you find this webinar both informative and engaging. Roger, if you want to start your presentation.
Thank you, Nicola, for the presentation. Thank you for the invitation to give a presentation at your Phosphate Digital Week. It's my pleasure to be here, and also thank you for all of you joining. Yes, Nicola mentioned, I will be giving some nutritional approaches in heat stress monogastrics, focusing in poultry. And first of all, I would like to say a couple words about the organization I'm working for, Shoulders Field Research. We are an independent research institute which provides both research and consultancy on ruminant, swine, and poultry. So we are located in the Netherlands, about 60 kilometers from Amsterdam. And yeah, as you can see from our facilities, we are focusing on dairy, poultry, swine. And yeah, our main task is to conduct independent knowledge, so to conduct independent research and to provide independent consultancy to the feed producing companies. So we have a long history, about 90 years, and we have mainly focused in Europe, Asia, and our feeding evaluation system is widely used in the Netherlands and Europe. And with that, I would like to start more specifically about my presentation topic on heat stress, saying that when the animals are suffering about heat stress, they undergo a leaky gut situation. So there is inflammation of the intestine, and that activates the immune system, increasing the requirement of certain nutrients. And yeah, if you need more nutrients for immune response, then the animals will have a reduced performance. And you know that heat stress will immediately reduce feed intake, and that conflicts directly with the increased nutrient requirements due to the immune activation. So the bird is undergoing this conflict situation on nutrients requirements. So as mentioned, heat stress produced a reduced feed intake due to thermoregulation, because you know that digestion produces heat. So if you have, the animals will try to reduce digestion to reduce the production of heat. And at the same time, the blood vessels will be more contracted, so there is a vasoconstriction at the intestinal level, and that will also result in reduced digestion. At the same time, as also indicated, heat stress reduces production performance because nutrients are needed for the immune response. So then, the birds will reduce the production of muscle or egg. So the bird will be undergoing a survival strategy. I think it's also important for us to realize what heat stress is, because we immediately think that heat stress is immediately related to temperature. But here in this nice table from Highline, this is more relevant for laying hens. You see that in different colors, in green, yellow, orange, red, you can see the different, let's say, zones or heat index zones of the bird. So being green, comfort zone, yellow, an alert zone, danger in the orange, and emergency in red. So you can see that the heat stress, the heat index is an equation of both temperature, but also humidity. And that also depends on the world area you're located. So if you're probably more in the Middle East, you have high temperature, but relatively low humidity. So then you can still find that your birds are in the comfort or only on the alert zone. But if you are more located in Southeast Asia, where you have high temperature and high humidity, you can see that you reach this orange and red zone earlier. So the message here is when we talk about heat stress, you need to consider both temperature and humidity. So what I would like to focus during my presentation are on different strategies that we have to deal or to cope with heat stress. And yeah, here I make first a list of nutritional strategies, feeding strategies, or management strategies. So I'm afraid I don't have time to deal with all of them. So actually what I would like to do during my presentation is focusing on these three nutrients, which actually are energy, the most expensive nutrient in poultry diets. Protein/amino acids is the second most expensive or relevant nutrient, and then electrolytic balance. So here, sodium, potassium, chloride. Of course, it's important to consider the roles of other strategies when we have heat stress, like supplement of vitamins, especially vitamin C, providing good and fresh quality water, some antioxidant products, betaine, but also some feeding strategies. So what's the best feed structure, the feeding management, and also at the barn level, what can we do in terms of stocking density and ventilation rate. So I don't have time to deal with all of those, so I will focus on the three that I already mentioned. And I start with energy, which is the most expensive nutrient. And I already give a clear advice here on what to do in a heat stress situation. My suggestion will be to increase the energy level about 5% when temperature becomes above 27 degrees Celsius. So that's one advice. The second advice is to try to prioritize the use of fat as energy source instead of using carbohydrates or protein as energy source. That also means that when you try to increase the amount of fat in your diets, you will probably also increase the amount of fibers. So that's another topic I will not cover, but here you need to be aware that when you play with one nutrient, it will have also immediately consequences with other nutrients. So when we talk about energy, we know that energy requirement can be dependent on the heat stress index, here indicated as temperature. When temperature rises above 21 degrees, we know that energy requirement could decrease because the requirement for maintenance is also reduced. However, when temperature rises above 27 degrees, energy requirement will also be increased because birds need extra energy for panting and to release all the heat that is being produced. So high density diets may be a good strategy under heat stress conditions. The point is, if you understood that with heat stress there is a decrease on feed intake, by providing a more dense diet, we will be able to maintain the daily nutrient intake. However, on the other hand, we need to be careful not to exceed these high density diets, because it could also undergo even a lower feed intake. And also, it's important to consider the fat source that you're using, because if you're using a more saturated fat, it may be that fat digestibility will be decreased. So here, another advice: during heat stress, make sure you're using a highly digestible fat source. So, yeah, you may say, in general, we can increase energy content by 5%. If you are too high, you may also undergo even lower feed intake. But in recent years, we also noticed that birds are responding a little less to energy. So you may also try to lower lower energy level and maintain amino acid levels to promote a higher intake. So it's about a difficult balance here. So as I mentioned, we will promote the use of fats as energy sources and try to moderate the use of carbohydrates and protein as energy. And the reason is that when we digest, especially proteins, but also carbohydrates, there is more heat increment. So that's heat increment is accounted when we work on a net energy system. So here is also the interest, and as authors we are working on moving from a metabolizable energy system to a net energy system to account for the heat increment when utilizing proteins and carbohydrates as energy source. So net energy could be of more interest in heat stress. So as I mentioned, when we use fats or oils, when we try to promote the use of those raw materials in feeds, you can also come into the conflict that too high levels of fat may negatively affect pellet quality when you mix them in the mixer. So sometimes you will also need to consider the use of a vacuum coater. And another point that should be considered is that when you use highly digestible and unsaturated fats, these are then more susceptible to oxidative rancidity. So then the use of antioxidant products in oils may also be important. Additionally, when we talk about laying hens, so when providing mash diets, having extra amount of fat can have a positive effect because it will bind all the fine particles. So that's about energy. When we move about crude protein, the practical advice that I will suggest is to reduce crude protein level between 1 to 1.5 percentage points. And at the same time, use feed-grade amino acids to have a balanced supply of those. And this is especially because proteins have the highest heat increment when being used as an energy source. So the advice here is clearly to reduce crude protein as much as possible under heat stress conditions to minimize also the energy costs that the birds need to spend to excrete the excess or the surplus of nitrogen. So then a proper use of synthetic amino acids is needed. Moreover, you can also ask yourself is if the amino acid profile may be different when birds are undergoing heat stress. And actually, there are at least indications for two amino acids. One is arginine and the other threonine that may be helping during heat stress. Arginine may be of interest because it vasodilates the blood vessels by supplying additional oxygen to the tissues, and threonine will eventually help on recovery the intestinal damage produced by heat stress. And I would like to show a couple examples about the threonine to lysine ratio. I would like to put it in context with an experimental challenge that we undergone or that we produce at SFR. So here you have also the reference, and then you see that in this trial there were 4 treatments, 2 infected with necrotic enteritis and 2 that were non-infected. And the other factor that was tested was the threonine to lysine ratio, and 2 levels were tested, 0.63 or 0.67. So in this study, it was clearly shown on the body weight gain from day 99 to 37 that the birds that were non-infected, an additional threonine level did not impact growth. However, among the infected birds, an addition or an extra supply of threonine had a positive effect on growth. So you may also relate this in a heat stress situation when there is intestinal damage, that a higher threonine to lysine level could be interesting to keep birds healthy. Another example that I would like to mention is also a publication from a colleague, SFR colleague, in Ross 308 birds about 17 days of age. And there were 2 groups, or a heat stress group, about 8 hours per day at 40 degrees, and a control treatment with no heat stress. And in those 2 situations, birds were fed either a control diet or a control diet with medium chain fatty acids, organic acids, and phenolic plant extracts. And then, similarly to the previous study here, there were birds fed a normal temperature or a heat stress conditions with a standard or supplemented diet. And then in both duodenum and jejunum, you could see that when birds were provided a standard feed, their intestines were damaged. But then when birds were supplemented with a combination of different additives, damage was reduced. So here it's also a sign that some additives may be also helping on intestinal integrity. If I go to the third nutrient that I would like to discuss today, this is DEB, dietary electrolytic balance. And the recommendation here is to increase DEB to a level of 225 to 250 milliequivalents per kilogram by using different ingredients like salt, sodium chloride, potassium chloride, and sodium bicarbonate in order to provide these extra electrolytes and increase DEB to the level mentioned here. And the reason for that is that when we have heat stress, the respiratory rate will increase. So birds will start panting, opening their mouth, wings spreading. So that makes birds to lose CO2 more quickly. So birds will undergo respiratory alkalosis, and that means that blood pH will increase and bicarbonate will be excreted through the kidneys and through urine. But not only bicarbonate but also extra sodium and potassium will be excreted. That produces further extra loss when we know that stress will cause this leaky gut condition. So birds will really be suffering of water loss, bicarbonate, sodium, and potassium loss. And I would like to show a couple of studies done in Pakistan. In the first study, they tested different sodium sources in order to increase the DEV level in Hobart broilers in a heat stress condition. So here you can see that there was a control diet either in the two phases, starter and finisher. In the control treatment, DEV was lower, 186 and 174, and then by supplying either sodium bicarbonate, sodium carbonate, or sodium sulfate, here you see that the sodium content was increased from 0.2 to 0.35 or from 0.15 to 0.33 to reach a DEV level of 250 for all three diets with a high DEV level. So when we look at the performance results, we observe that the control treatment had the worst body weight gain and low feed intake and worse FCR, and the three treatments supplemented with extra sodium from either bicarbonate, carbonate, or sulfate had an increased body weight gain, feed intake, and better FCR. So really providing extra sodium and reaching a DEV level of 250 had a positive effect in heat-stressed birds. However, you can also see that the water to feed ratio also increased. So that could also be a factor to consider if you have wet litter issues. Providing extra sodium will also increase the water to feed ratio, so that will also increase the litter moisture. But then you also see that depending on the sodium source used, you also obtain a different water to feed ratio, being the lowest with sodium sulfate. In a second study also conducted in Pakistan with heat stress Hobart broilers, in this case, DEV was increased from 186 or 174 to 250 by using three different potassium sources. So here we have potassium bicarbonate, potassium carbonate, and potassium sulfate by maintaining the same amount of sodium and chloride. And in this case, the results were not as clear as in the previous study with sodium, because in this study, we observe a clear positive effect of potassium bicarbonate, and they increased both feed intake, body weight gain, and reduced FCR. And the two other treatments with potassium show more intermediate results, so no significant positive effect on body weight gain, but better FCR. And again, if we consider water to feed ratio, we see that although you obtain a better performance with potassium carbonate, you also see a higher water to feed ratio in this treatment, whereas with potassium carbonate and sulfate, you don't see an increased water to feed ratio compared to the control. So as a DEV, I will say that it's clear to conclude that extra sodium and potassium could reduce the negative effects of heat stress by stimulating water intake and therefore also feed intake. Sodium seems to be more effective than potassium. Sodium bicarbonate seems to be the most effective tool to improve body weight gain in heat stress conditions. However, also important to consider prices of those ingredients. So as general advice, practical advice, I will say to play also with salt, considering also potassium chloride, sodium sulfate, sodium bicarbonate to achieve this level in the feed. But also you could consider supplementing some of those ingredients in drinking water, about 0.25%. So as in summary of my presentation, if you remember, I touched base in 3 different nutrients, one on energy, and the main advice here is to increase the energy level by 5% when temperature becomes higher than 27 degrees, and also optimizing or increasing the use of fat as an energy source instead of carbohydrates and proteins. Proteins need to be suggested. The suggestion is to reduce the crude protein level by 1 to 1.5 percentage points by then you having a good use of synthetic amino acids. Always consider a balanced supply, and also considering extra arginine, extra threonine, as I showed in those studies. And for the third nutrient, I will say increasing DV to 225, 250 seems to be advisable when using additional salt, potassium chloride, and sodium bicarbonate. Other nutrients that I didn't have time to discuss today, I will say the use of vitamin C could be increased in either feed or water, and always make sure that birds have access to fresh, cool drinking water. So these last two are some other nutrient strategies that you can also consider, including antioxidants, and I believe Yetzabel will present some data on that in the next presentation. But don't forget that these 3 nutrients, I think, are the most critical, the most expensive ones, and then you have other tools to further help. Hopefully that was also interesting for you. Of course, there are different contexts, different people have different energy protein DP levels, so this advice is of course custom made, but I hope that the general ideas were clear, and I will be happy to take further questions after Yetzabel's presentation. Thank you for your attention so far.
Thank you very much, Roger, for your presentation. It was very interesting. Now we'll start the presentation from Yetzabel, and don't hesitate to ask your question in the Q&A section. And after the 10 minutes of presentation of Yetzabel, we will answer your question. Thank you.
Thank everybody. It's a pleasure being here and to show you. You hear me? Okay. Pas mon écran, c'est ça? Okay. You see? No. No? Voilà. Et là? Okay. You see you can see, okay, perfect. So I will start again. Good morning, everybody. So it's a pleasure being here and to present you some of our expertise here in Phosphea. Thank you, Dr. Roger, for the presentation. It was really complete and clear. So continue with the presentation as Doctor mentioned. There are different alternatives to manage heat stress in monogastrics, and Phosphea offers different solutions for this situation. So, for example, we have 2 different products that can provide phosphorus, calcium, and sodium. The first one is monosodium phosphate that will provide phosphorus at 22.5% and sodium at 16%. The second one is neophos that will provide phosphorus at 20%, calcium at 20% as well, and sodium at 5%. If we take a look in the relative biological value of INRA, of these phosphates, these two phosphates, and we can see for every species, for poultry and swine, we can see as well monocalcium phosphate as a reference, and the relative biological value, it's relative high for MSP, monosodium phosphate, and neophos. 91 if we take the example of poultry for monocalcium, 92 for swine, and monosodium phosphate 100 relative biological value for this phosphate, and for neophos 82 and 94 for swine. So monosodium phosphate provides this high phosphorus digestibility, and neophos will provide these three nutrients in one solution. It means that we are going to save some place in the formula, less incorporation of other ingredients rich in sodium, and we have to highlight that these two phosphates has no chlorine in the inside. So we can provide as well this high electrolytic balance, like Dr. mentioned, in these cases of heat stress. So these two phosphates are sodium without chlorine. If we take a look in the figure here below, we can see the different phosphates and salt and their electrolytic balance, mil equivalent per kilo. So we can see that monosodium and neophos has a higher electrolytic balance if we compare to other kind of phosphates like monocalcium, monodicalcium, or dicalcium. This electrolytic balance has a formula that Dr. Roger also showed before, that it's the balance between sodium, potassium, and chlorine. But of course, dietary electrolyte balance is an alternative, and it's something that we have to manage during heat stress. We can also think in other kind of additives and alternatives to boost our animals in terms of antioxidants or prebiotics. So Phosphea has as well a product that is a prebiotic antioxidant that is called Calcigrow. Calcigrow is a citrus extract, and calcified marine alga solution is a natural solution that is incorporated on top 1 kilo per ton. Calcigrow provides prebiotic effects thanks to peptide oligosaccharides. So it means that we are going to maintain the gut health, we're going to have a better nutrient absorption such as calcium, and it's important, calcium for layers of breeders and broilers, and we will have better calcium deposition for bones and eggshell. Prebiotic effect doesn't come alone, comes as well with this antioxidant effect that is polyphenols. Polyphenols will limit this effect of stresses like heat stress or other kind of stresses. And how it's going to act this mode of action, to simplify this mode of action, so we are going to add these polyphenols and POS, this prebiotic antioxidant product, on top in the diet. This fermentation of peptide oligosaccharides will stimulate the beneficial microflora of the gut, and also release some short-chain fatty acids. All this mode of action will help to promote the epithelial cell proliferation and have a better nutrient absorption. At the end, we are going to limit the pathogens adhesions in the gut. When there is a peptide oligosaccharides, the prebiotics fermentation in the gut, we are also going to decrease the pH. So enhancing the calcium absorption that it's important for bones and eggshell. So Calcigrow contains these peptide oligosaccharides, these prebiotics, and also these polyphenols. These polyphenols, when there's an stress like heat stress, and there are an overproduction of free radicals, like we can see here in the balance. There is an overproduction of free radicals, and the endogenous antioxidants are not efficient enough. We have what we know about, we have this oxidative stress. So what happened with this oxidative stress? So we will have these performances reduce and this mortality increase. So, for example, the laying rate who will drop the reduction in egg production or the deterioration of egg quality. So that's why it's important to provide these antioxidant sources to the feed and to the animal, because antioxidants will neutralize free radicals by donating an electron to their atom. And Calcigrow provides these exogenous antioxidants. So we will balance these free radicals and these antioxidants, increasing also the amount of antioxidants stored in the cells. But all these hypotheses has been tested and validated. For example, I show you this study made in 2019 in France with SAW test, where we measure the antioxidant reserve in the blood. We have this study, this experimental study with Rhode Island in layer hens, and was between 68 to 79, so 10 weeks, and we supply Calcigrow 1 kilo per ton. So we measure the antioxidant reserve in blood sample in the week 74 and 78. When we see the results, first we are going to take a look in the right, the yellow part, and we measure the antioxidant reserves with Resida test. Resida test will measure the antioxidant reserves that we have in cells, how we are going to release these antioxidants when we add some enzymes. For example, in this test, we add 3 different enzymes for these different reserves: glucosidase, sulfatase, and glucuronidase. What we have to see in this test is the half osmolysis time. So it is the time that it takes to hemolyze by oxidation 50% of the sample. So more high is this half hemolysis time. So it means that we have a good defense on antioxidants that takes time to have this oxidation. So now we are going to take a look in this graph, and we can see how I mentioned, we measure antioxidants in 2 weeks, 74 and 78. So we can see the control, that is the light yellow, and the Calcigrow is the yellow bars. We can see that we increase the half osmolysis time with the 3 different reserves where we use different enzymes. And it was the same for the week 78. So we measure these antioxidant reserves in the cells, so it means that the animal could use these antioxidants in any cases of stresses. But of course, we also measure the product in case of heat stress conditions in India, for example, in 2022. Here we use white bovans 300, and the trial was between 61 to 80 weeks, so 20 weeks in total. We have 2 groups, the control and the treatment, and we use as well 1 kilo per ton of this product, Calcigrow. We measure different parameters, and we were in a heat stress condition. We were higher than 25% degrees and higher than 70% of humidity. There's someone. So when we see the results, we saw the laying rate. We were in the last weeks of production, so we got a decrease. But when we see both groups, control and Calcigrow improved the laying rate by 2%. So we maintain the laying rate under heat stress condition, and we ensure the animal health status. We also measure egg quality, shell strength, and shell thickness. So we saw as well an improvement in different weeks, like 71 and 80 weeks. So at the end of the production, we saw this increase in egg quality because we provide these polyphenols during this heat stress and also these prebiotics. So we are allowed to maintain the egg quality under these heat stress conditions. We have recommendations with these products for 2 different species, for poultry and for swine. Again, we provide a natural solution with peptide oligosaccharides, our prebiotics, and polyphenols. And in case of poultry, we recommend to start the supplementation of Calcigrow 2 weeks before the heat wave, 1 kilo per ton for 10 weeks. And in case of swine, to manage as well the microbiota and to reduce oxidative stress and to improve gut health, we also have the same recommendations 2 weeks before the heat wave, 1 kilo per ton for 10 weeks. To summarize how Phosphea can help with this management of heat stress, so we mentioned Calcigrow, our prebiotic antioxidants, to improve gut health and to reduce oxidative stress, using 1 kilo per ton for 10 weeks. And we also saw at the beginning 2 products to balance electrolytic balance with monosodium phosphate and neophos that are phosphates without chlorine. And the incorporation is according to formulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jetsabel, for the presentation. Now we have some questions in the chat. The first one for you, Roger. Is there any attention to balance of salt to the other source like sodium bicarbonate, for example?
Yes, see the question. Yeah, good point. Because that's also one of the practical, let's say, constraints that we find when you say no, we want to increase sodium level to increase DV. The first easiest way will be to add salt, sodium chloride, but then usually there is a maximum on chloride, and which is limiting the amount of salt that you can be providing. And if I remember correctly, the maximum chloride level, according to Aviagen recommendations, it's about 2.3 gram kilogram or 0.23%. And I will say this is Aviagen recommendations. In SFR experience, this can be higher. So I think you can, according to SFR recommendations, you can supply a little bit more salt, but then you reach a point that chloride is limiting. So then you need to provide a sodium source that doesn't contain chloride. So that's why, and that's when sodium bicarbonate will come into the ratio. And then sometimes I also find the practical question I heard about ABC4, right? And this is mainly relevant in piglets about the acid balance capacity, and that I will say for poultry is of less relevance. But in piglets, that may then be the limitation, not only for salt, but then for sodium bicarbonate. So I will say in poultry, yeah, sodium bicarbonate can be used, but then you also need to be aware when you increase sodium too much, that also will give some issues on litter quality. So if you want to reduce litter quality, foot pad dermatitis or litter moisture, then you may need to consider replacing some of the sodium bicarbonate by potassium bicarbonate, for instance. But then it's a more expensive additive and not always available. Yeah.
Yes, because in the same topic, we have a question on the difference between sodium and potassium source. So for you, the main difference is on the price.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the first option, of course, will be salt. The second option for price and also for interest is sodium bicarbonate, and then the third option, in my view, will be then the potassium salts. And also, I see on the question of Ahmed is on sodium sulfate, and I will say the point of attention is to have a look on the amount of sulfur that you have in the diet. So if you have lysine sulfate, if you have a lot of trace minerals from sulfate form and a lot of sodium sulfate, then if you add up all the sulfates coming from all ingredients, you need to pay attention because sulfur is known to be more laxative. So if you have a too high sulfur level, then if you have issues on liter quality, that could be a point of attention. But if you're only using sodium sulfate, then I think it's also a very good source of sodium.
Okay. I have a question for you on the same topic, on the balance and the electrolytic balance. Before heat stress, we have to manage or balance electrolytic before heat stress, or we can do this modification of the balance after or during heat stress. I don't know if my question is clear on the.
So whether you need to, the question is whether you need to do these adjustments before or during. Ideally, I would say before. I mean, I think it's really hard to intervene immediately if you have a heat stress peak. Then the option to supply those salts via water then may be of interest. So if you know in advance that you're gonna be heading towards high temperature, high humidity, then I will do it via feed. If it comes as more unpredicted event, then I think you have the tool to supply those salts via water. But then it's I guess always tricky to have a good control at farm level that this will happen and the dosage will be right. So I think from a nutritionist point of view, it's always feel safer to do it via the feed. But then as I said, I think water of course can be another tool.
Okay. Just a last question on electrolytic balance, because we have a last question. Apparently someone used between 1 kilogram and 2 kilogram of sodium carbonate. It's an appropriate amount, or what is the optimal dosage of sodium carbonate for poultry and ruminants?
Yeah, that depends a lot at the end on the amount of salt that you have. No? So I will not, usually when I think of additional sodium bicarbonate, I always need to consider the amount of the nutrients that you have, right? So you need to usually set a minimum and maximum on sodium, minimum maximum on chloride. Usually I set a maximum on potassium, but then also a range of DEV. So if you control these 4 nutrients, I think you will be on the right side. So I don't have like a magic number for sodium bicarbonate, but it's more to really look into the nutrient level. I think that is my advice.
Okay. And I think I have a last question for you. What is your opinion about the betaine usage for heat stress?
Yeah, I think it's been shown broadly that betaine has different functions, right? One of them is as methyl donor, so you can eventually, on a nutrient aspect, replace some of the choline function, but it's also been shown that betaine has a clear function as a osmoregulator, so it reduces the negative effect of heat stress. So that's been clearly shown by increasing then feed intake performance. It also acts as an antioxidant. So I think the effects of betaine in heat stress are clearly, the positive effects are clearly well demonstrated. So we have some experiences at SFR about 600, 700 ppms. I can show some of the studies with it. So I think apart from the nutrient effect of betaine on as a methyl donor, I think the other function as osmoregulator in heat stress is also clearly shown. So I will recommend it if you have heat stress.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Now I have 2 questions for you, Jezabel. The first one, citric pectin is highly fermentable. It will make even more heat damage in intestine. How can it actually help?
Yeah. Thank you, Nicolas. It's a good question, and it's true. And it's true that it's that citrus pectin can be fermentable, but Calcigro has a specific formulation to use this citrus pectin in beneficial. I mentioned before that we are going to promote the production, the fermentation of this prebiotic pectin-oligosaccharides thanks to this citrus extract will release some short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. So we saw in some of our trials where we measure histological intestinal epithelium, we saw the beneficial of these different of the use of Calcigro. And we know that butyrate, this short-chain fatty acid that it will be produced thanks to the fermentation of pectin-oligosaccharides, will promote as well this epithelial, intestinal epithelial. So it's well known that butyrate it's a good short-chain fatty acid for the gut health. So we measure this. We have these different trials where we saw these improvements in gut health. So we didn't see any damage. And we can also share with you, if you are interested, we can also share these results and this information about how we measure Billus height, crypt depth. So we didn't see an intestinal damage. Calcigro is formulated specifically to have this beneficial and functional effect and not to be a negative perk.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Jezabel. Just a last question. In the trial in India, the condition of the birds was 25 degrees Celsius and 70% of humidity. According to the presentation of Roger and the SFR recommendation, it's not considering like its stress condition. Can you make some comments on this? Well.
Yes, actually, I didn't put like the whole temperature and humidity that we measured the whole trial because it was like a big graph. But I can show you. I can send you as well these measurements. We were minimum 25 and minimum 70. We reached until at least 38 degrees, and we were at 80 or 90% of humidity. So we got a heat stress in this trial. And I can also share with you these different measurements in different weeks where we work.
Okay. I think we don't have other question. So it's the webinar. It's finished. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and for your attention. Don't hesitate if you have additional questions to contact our team or to contact Roger. Thank you very much and have a nice day.